Hey, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for coming down here to the most beautiful public library in all of Mill Valley. Right? Oh my gosh, I just had a visitor here and took them around, and I love coming by the front and mostly coming around the back and just looking up at the building here. It's just so pretty. And thank you very much for our wonderful supporters at the library here that'll be taping this. My name is Charlie Vogelheim. I'm an alleged millbilly, and I say that because I did go to kindergarten across the street at Old Mill School, so there. I am just so happy as a former board member at the Mill Valley Historical Society and big-time supporter for these first Wednesday talks, and this is a great one. As a huge fan of trivia, I can't wait to get all the answers for next week, and I'm sure you have them. Steve McNamara was born in Chicago in 1934, graduated from Princeton in 1955, and spent his entire life in journalism. He's worked for Winston-Salem Journal, Miami Herald, Sports Car Illustrated, we have to talk about that, and the San Francisco Examiner. He's owned and or managed the Pacific Sun, the Arc, and one of our local favorites, the San Quentin News, one of the few inmate-directed prison newspapers in America. For 38 years, the Pacific Sun was a lively mainstay for life in Mill Valley and Marin County, and he'll explain how it came to be, and surprisingly, how it ended. 70 years, prize-winning career in journalism. He's married to Kay. There you are. They live right here in Mill Valley, have 6 children, 8 grandchildren, and there was a note at the bottom that said Kay tended a feature in the Pacific Sun that led to a lively period of romance and marriage. And for Sun readers, some of might well be represented in the audience tonight. Looking forward to that part. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve McNamara.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that nice introduction. And thanks for inviting me to talk about the Pacific Sun newspaper that during its better times was located here in Mill Valley. I'll explain how I wound up at the Sun in 1966, why my wife Kay and I pulled a plug in 2004 after 38 years, and how for the next 16 years I led the rebirth of the San Quentin News, which was then the only newspaper in the United States run by the incarcerated. I should say at this point, you will not hear me, or should not hear me say the words criminal or prisoner, because in the San Quentin Rehabilitation Center, which used to be called the San Quentin Prison, there are no prisoners or the incarcerated. They are now all referred to as residents. So if you meet a fella in a blue shirt on the street with orange letters in the back, you will refer to him as being a resident of San Quentin and not those words I just mentioned. Okay, I'll start by note that I'm 91 years old, and I've been in the newspaper business for about 70 years. Which is pretty much all I've ever done. I've done this, as was said, in Winston-Salem Journal and Twin City Sentinel, 2 papers, 1 ownership. Miami, Europe on road racing and Formula One circuit, San Francisco, and then at last in Mill Valley. That record is strange because back in 1955, when I graduated from college, I had no intention and no experience in journalism. I'd never worked for a high school paper, not for a college paper, never had a sunny job or summer job at a newspaper, and I had never written a single word that had been printed. So I've written a lot of stories since then, many of which are represented in papers that I'll wave at you as the story continues, and you can come up afterwards and have a look at them. There's one that's really aching with nostalgia. I will get to it, but I can't help but jump in with it right now. I covered the 1966 Democratic Convention, 60 Democratic Convention in Chicago for both the morning and the afternoon papers. And stories will, I think, under the present circumstances, probably pure nostalgia. As here, Adlai, virtually clean nomination. House Keith Palmer nominated on the second ballot. Democrats, that's when check civil rights amendments. Stevenson nomination almost within draft. Yes, I can say those. Okay. Back on track. My shift to journalism happened because I bailed out on my planned profession, which was to become a foreign service officer. Preparing for that profession, I'd written a required senior thesis on the Foreign Service and its feud with the State Department. The two hated each other back then. But while I was researching the thesis, I realized the Foreign Service was not for me. Being a diplomat seemed boring. But I had no fallback option, none. After graduation, I wound up sleeping on the couch of friends of the family in New York, thinking maybe I could work for an ad agency. Well, that was an even worse idea. However, the man of the house where I was roosting was a family friend, a guy named Mac Lowry, who was in charge of giving out the arts and culture money for the Ford Foundation. He and his wife, Elsa, probably decided after about a week, Steve's a nice guy and we love his family, but we have to get him off our couch. So fortunately, Mac Lowry had a good friend named Wally Carroll from their World War II days together in London. And he was this guy, Wally Carroll, was the editor of the Winston-Salem Journal, the ones I just showed you, and Sentinel in North Carolina, which were among the state's several first-rate daily newspapers. Also, my girlfriend at the time was the editor of her college paper, and her dad was the chief of the Time Life Bureau in Atlanta. And I had thought those two had interesting jobs. Also, my Uncle Wally Duell had been a famous foreign correspondent before World War II. So, Mac Lowry picked up on all this, made a phone call to Winston-Salem, got Wally Carroll on the line, and I was offered a job at $65 a week. I took the train to Winston-Salem in June 1955 and showed up on the second floor newsroom of the paper. The city editor was a no-nonsense Army vet with a crew cut named Sherman Shore, and he looked up from his desk and he said, "Tell me, Steve, what have you written?" And I said, I've written a long article about the State Department and the Foreign Service not getting along so well. Said Sherman Shore, "No, I meant, what have you written for a newspaper?" "Nothing," I said. And right then, I bet Sherman Shore thought, Jesus Christ, I need a reporter, and they sent me this kid who knows nothing. But I was standing there in front of him. I'd already been hired by his boss, the editor. There was an empty desk in the newsroom, and I knew how to type. So I was put to work covering the output of North Carolina stringers. Stringers were mostly gossipy old ladies in nearby farm towns who submitted weekly reports on who was visiting their town or who had died. These ladies could barely write a coherent sentence. So I was put to work shaping up their stories. I got pretty good at it. And then one day, something happened that changed my life. The SETI editor, Sherman Shore, handed me a story that had been just churned out of the Associated Press printer. A Winston-Salem family had gone on vacation in the Tennessee Valley, and they had gone out on a boat which had capsized, and 3 of them had drowned. Now, this was not big news in Knoxville, Tennessee, but it was big news in Winston-Salem. Sherman handed me the story, 8-piece thing, and told me to expand it for that day's afternoon paper. We're talking 8:30 now, and the paper goes to press at noon, only 4 hours away. Now, I made a lot of phone calls, a lot because I kept forgetting to ask important questions. And I still had to make another phone call. And the phone calls were such as, how far from the shore had the boat been when it capsized? How deep was the water? What were the victims' ages? How big was the boat? What had been the rescue efforts? And on and on. But I did get the job done. The presses in the basement rumbled to life. Bobby, the copy boy, brought up a bundle of papers from the press room, and my life changed forever. Underneath, a two-line headline stretched halfway across the front page was, I still get emotional thinking about this, was a long story, and underneath this byline. Here's the story, and you can't read it here, but the byline said, by Steve McNamara, Sentinel reporter. Yeah, big deal. Right then, I knew that this would be, terrible. This would be my life forever, and it has been. So I spent 2 years at Winston-Salem, covered the 1956 Democratic Convention in Chicago, showed you the papers, writing for both the morning and afternoon papers. And then I tried out for a new position they were doing, a one-person bureau in Washington, D.C. And I thought there were two of us down to the wire about who they were going to send to Washington for this cushy job, and they picked the other guy. And I actually think they made the right decision. The other guy was Tom Wicker, who went on to become the New York Times leading political reporter in Washington and winning a Pulitzer Prize for his coverage of the assassination of John F. Kennedy in Dallas. So, yeah, I lost, but I was still miffed to lose. So I shopped for a new job, landed at the Miami Herald, and became the day's sports editor eventually. I took on coverage of sports car racing because within the Herald's big sports department staff, there was nobody who had a clue about this new sport of road racing. I pretended I did, because actually I didn't have any knowledge about this new sport of road racing, but I owned one of the very first sports cars in America, an MGA. And that was enough to convince the sports editor that, hey, maybe this kid knows something. So I got the job, and then I began to cover racing throughout that part of the world. I covered them locally. I went to Sebring, went to Nassau, went to Havana, did the Indianapolis 500 as well as locally. I was the only guy who could even pretend that he knew what he was doing. And then I went to Europe. From Miami, I went to Europe because that's where the top-ranked road racing and Formula One racing were happening. So writing for Sports Cars Illustrated and Car and Driver, I became good friends with a lot of drivers who really kind of got me straightened out on what was happening in the sport. People like Sterling Moss, the Rodriguez brothers, after whom the Mexico City race circuit is memorialized. They both got killed. And also Bruce McLaren, whose successor company last year won the prize for championship Formula One cars, beating out Ferrari. My high point in Europe was a cover story for Sports Cars Illustrated on Enzo Ferrari. He didn't speak English, or at least he said he didn't, and I didn't speak Italian, but we staggered along in very broken French. And here is my story, cover story on Ferrari, and inside, big long story on Enzo Ferrari that somehow or other translated from the Italian. It was in English, needless to say. But that was I went to a few more races, but in Europe, I had married a Danish girl I'd met in Miami, and we'd run out of money. We came back to the States, and I caught on with the San Francisco Examiner. during the 1960 Winter Olympic Games up at what was then, bad word, Squaw Valley. I became executive sports editor and then Sunday editor. One really cool, super cool sidelight was that between editions, back then daily papers would have 5 or 6 editions. They shut down the paper and replate some pages, and then they'd start it up again. So one sidelight was between editions at the Examiner, lots of reporters and editors. The Examiner was then at Hearst in a Hearst building at 3rd and Market. We would walk down 3rd Street to Jerry and Johnny's legendary saloon for a drink or two, or maybe more. But there was one guy who never went. He was staying in the office to write on these lined yellow legal pads. And one night I said, "Frank, why don't you come with us?" He said, "I'm working on a project." Well, that busy guy on the Examiner copy desk was named Frank Herbert. And between editions of the Examiner, on those yellow legal pads, he was writing Dune, his epic science fiction work that has lit up books and films for years and years since then. Well, finally, in 1960, been waiting, I know. My story here tonight travels over the Golden Gate Bridge at home in Marin. 2 years later, in 1966, I met the Pacific Sun. Now, during the 11 years I'd spent at other publications, I was consumed by a desire to have my own newspaper. Back then, it was a good idea to own a newspaper. It's not so much anymore. While at the Examiner, I'd been teaching magazine editing at San Francisco State, and I'd paid a lot of attention, some of you may remember, to Look magazine, which was then famous for its great design, and also to the Village Voice in New York City, which had been founded in 1955 for its flair and insight. The Voice was really ratty looking, but it was great to read. And then the first and only alternative news weekly in America. The Pacific Sun was to become the second alternative news weekly in America. So my chance to have my own paper arrived in the personage of Merrill and Joanne Grohman, Grohman, who in 1953 had started a little paper called the Pacific Sun and Tamalpais Times in a room behind Ed's Superette, which was then the name of the grocery store in Stinson Beach. I don't know what it's called now. It's not Ed's Superette. So the Grohmans had a blended family of 11 children and a herd of goats, and they were busy going broke. I didn't know the last part of that sentence at the time. But I eventually sorted things out by paying no more than what I'd already paid for the down payment, and then I went to work. Myself and in an office, and a reporting staff of 3 plus a pressman. So in December of 1966, I had bought a dead horse. But as events were to prove, along with the dead horse had come a wonderfully fertile pasture named Marin County. Here is that dead horse. This is it, front and back. And by serving the coastal communities of Marin County. So there's what I've got for my money. All right. Not a lot. Now, before, what do I mean by a fertile pasture? I mean, before the Golden Gate Bridge was finished in 1937 and World War II ended in 1945, Marin County was a woodsy, bucolic enclave with a population of about 53,000. But by 1970, the population had quadrupled to 206,000. However, it wasn't just the number of people who had streamed across the bridge, it was who had streamed across the bridge, the kind of people. In the 1956 presidential election, Marin had voted 66% Republican. By the 2024 election, the number was down from 66% to 17%. The county's outlook had changed dramatically. It was the 60s after all, and the sun rose to move it along. Our very first step was to run a two-part, these are the first two issues of the Pacific Sun after I bought it. Our very first step was to run a two-part series from the Examiner of all places. The last assignment I had made as Sunday editor was to have a reporter and photographer spend a week living in Marin City for an in-depth report for our Sunday magazine. The story was great, but Charles Gould, the ex-Navy guy who was the Examiner publisher, he refused to run it. It was too sympathetic for him. So I asked Ed Dooley, who was the editor, down the step. Now, he had liked the story a lot, but he was powerless to have it run. I asked him if I could have it as a going-away present. He agreed, and the result was a dynamic layout of my very first two issues of the paper that made it clear that something had happened at the Pacific Sun. Remember this one? Okay, here was my first two, cover my first issues. Rather different. So that made it clear that to the Pacific Sun something had happened. So we began fighting the idiotic plans that Marin's old guard had favored, such as a city of 30,000 called Marin Cello, bankrolled by Gulf Oil, that was to overlook the Golden Gate Bridge, plus a nuclear power plant. Yes, a nuclear power plant that was sitting atop the San Andreas Fault, Bodega's Head. The hole is still there. Plus Southern California-style marinas filling Richardson Bay and Bolinas Lagoon, plus freeways rammed through the Ross Valley and up Highway 1 from Mill Valley. Now, it's hard to remember that plans so terrible were actually on the drawing boards, but they were, and we at the Sun worked hard to help choke them off. That was serious stuff. More fun was our coverage of the trial of 58-year-old Garnett Brennan, the pot-smoking principal of the one-room Nicasio School. Some guy in West Marin had been arrested for selling marijuana. His defense attorney looked all over and found people who were willing to testify to Garnett Brennan's character. And one of them happened to be Mrs. Brennan. She attested in writing that she'd smoked pot for 18 years and saw nothing wrong with it. So the three Nicasio School trustees got wind of this and called a public meeting in the single-room schoolhouse. TV crews from San Francisco raced to the school where the hearing featured sweet and prim Mrs. Brennan with her notoriously flamboyant attorney, Molly Manudri. The three trustees praised their beloved principal to the skies, and then they fired her. Then came a wonderful postscript. To replace Mrs. Brennan, the trustees promoted the second of the school's three teachers, a guy named Jeffrey Pflugrath. It was no secret around there that Jeffrey also smoked a lot of pot. He had just failed to sign an affidavit saying that he had. So here is the Sun's cover of this event, which shows, here's Garnett Brennan, sweet Garnett Brennan. Here is Molly Manudri. Here's Jeffrey Pflugrath, the guy who got her job, even though he smoked more pot than she did. And then here's all the TV guys. A couple of them down here waving the sound baton in Molly Manudri's thing. Well, the story was spectacular, with a great page one photo of the hearing. And the story won first place in the annual San Francisco Press Club contest for news coverage. This new Pacific Sun was now on the map, the serious stuff and the not so serious stuff. And that was a good place to be. Now is a good time in my wrap here to explain the main reason why the Sun was a good paper. The main thing was our writers. We did not pay them a lot. There's one in the audience who can testify to that. She won't yell at me, will you? No, okay. Where's my check? Where's my check? All right. But we gave writers and reporters stuff to write that interested them. Often at traditional newspapers, the reporters are given areas to cover, which are called beats. Maybe it's a police beat or a local politics beat or weather. Writers churn out stories on those subjects. At the Sun, it was different. Writers picked what interested them. My thought was that if the subject doesn't interest the writer, how do I expect the writer to produce a story that interests the reader? Also, our writers were encouraged to explore the meaning of their stories. At our main competitor, the San Rafael IJ, writers knocked out stories on deadline, and the city editor, believe it or not, Andy Anderson, wanted the names in a story to always have the middle initial included. And as long as the story could be an axe murder name, but if they tracked the guy down, if you didn't have his middle initial, the story was a failure. All right, what a story meant long term wasn't that important, but it was important to the Sun, and the result was a cascade of wonderfully compelling articles that won awards over and over. There was great work by Joe Kramer, Joe Zimmerman, Joanne Williams, Eve Pell, Matt Stafford, and Alice Yarish, plus someone sitting in this audience. Writing on life in general. Also, we had Dr. Hippocrates on sex and drugs, Sheila Benson and Irv Cohen on film, two great film writers. Sheila got stolen away by the LA Times, which made her its #1 film critic. So we knew we were onto something. Stephanie von Bukow on music and opera, Sister Rosetta Mulch, great name. On gardening, Jack Shelton on food. All those fine writers, plus many more, were nurtured by remarkable editors, notably longtime managing editors like Don Stanley, Linda Hickes, Hut Landon, Jan Perry. Also important, if you looked at the staff box, 15 or 20 names, you'd notice that a majority of them were women. Now, from my mother, I had absorbed the belief that women were not equal to men, they were superior. Now, if the Sun had written about car crashes, crime, and weddings, events that most weeklies and some dailies like to feature, all this talent would have gone to waste. But we wrote about the environment, women's rights, racial justice, free expression, gay rights, the arts, education, music, and marijuana. What was significant in the world where we found ourselves? We did long, well-researched articles on subjects such as Marin's water supply. Was that one still up? No. And why, at the time, Santa Rosa Junior College was a strong and popular asset in Sonoma County, while the College of Marin was notable for its squabbles. I think it's gotten better, but it wasn't so hot back then. One especially great story we produced was a prime factor in the creation of Point Reyes National Seashore. The area had been picked to become a national park in 1960 at a West Marin ceremony featuring Lady Bird Johnson. But that was just an idea. What was needed was federal money to buy the land, and there was none. The whole area was in danger of being overrun with weekend homes, dude ranches, and gas stations. And into the breach came Peter Baer, one of Marin's all-time great public servants, and a Republican to boot. He had been a council member and mayor in Mill Valley, a Marin supervisor, and was to become a state senator of immense stature. In 1970, he saw that West Marin, if West Marin was to become a park and not a slurb, action was needed. He came to me with a plan. let's create a special section of the paper, call it Save Our Seashore, fill it with great photos of the beauty of West Marin, and flood Congress with this wonderful sales piece. Then let's follow it up with a delegation to Washington. We printed 100,000 copies of marvelous photos and text in a special 56-page Save Our Seashore section of the Pacific Sun. Copies were placed on the desk of every member of Congress. Armed with this, a delegation headed to Washington. It included our very savvy county council at the time, Doug Maloney, prominent Sierra Club people, and crucially, a much admired West Marin rancher named Boyd Stewart. That was up there a little while ago. But here's a picture of Boyd and four generations of the Stewart family, which is no longer in West Marin, part of the big buyout. In Congress, the purse strings were tightly controlled by Wayne Aspinall, chair of the House Interior Committee. Aspinall hated environmentalists, calling them overindulgent zealots. Boyd Stewart was assigned the dubious task of meeting with Aspinall in his office. The two of them chatted a bit, looked at the West Marin photos, and then they realized that Boyd's brother had worked with Aspinall as a boy in the Colorado mines. "My God," said Aspinall to Boyd, "you go down and tell Ralph Taylor, who was head of the park subcommittee, that this park is a good deal, a real good deal. I'll call down and tell him myself." Next day was the hearing that was going to be about money. And the people who were in this Marin delegation had expected it to be drawn out and difficult. But after Aspinall's call, Boyd remembered that, quote, the next day at the hearing, it took all of 10 minutes for them to vote $39 million to buy the land for the park. So he was more than the heart of West Marin. 2 years later marked another significant moment at the paper. We hired Barbara Boxer. She'd run for county supervisor against the incumbent, Pete Aragoni, and lost. I consoled her at an election night party in Larkspur, and she bemoaned the fact that for her campaign, she learned so much about Marin and now had little use for it. Now, perhaps having had more drinks than prudent, I said, "You should come work for the paper." Other members of the Sun staff were startled at first, some a bit miffed, but it quickly became evident that she was a first-rate reporter, winning several state prizes before leaving us after 2 years to plunge back into politics, of all things. Before Barbara left, she and I cooked up a plan, and we sold stock for a San Francisco edition of the Sun. New shareholders ranged from people in the environmental Goldman family, they give big awards now, to the ever-present Willie Brown. He's everywhere. Look, there's Willie Brown. Our city edition lost money, and after about 8 months, we pulled the plug. But there were astonishing long-term results. The San Francisco edition had attracted the interest of this young guy recently arrived from North Carolina. He had an idea for a cheeky column about the young strivers in San Francisco, and we ran 5 weekly episodes to great acclaim. Then his column died when we buried the San Francisco edition and returned the Pacific Sun to Marin. The author was devastated. He'd lost his shot at being a published author. He proposed to move the locale to Marin, but he had to admit he didn't know this county. All his cool references, such as pickup time at the Marin Safeway, would not work across the bridge. Editor executive editor, Don Stanley, and I hoped we might find somebody to write a similar column with Marin connections. Then we did. In through the mail slot one day came a satirical restaurant review, the purported critique by a motorcycle gang of an imaginary French restaurant in Mill Valley. The author, a teacher at San Francisco State, was unknown to us, but very funny. We convinced her to write a weekly satire of Marin posers. Now, you may have guessed the author's name was Syra McFadden. She was about to launch The Serial in Marin, picking up the name of our first satirical column in the Sun San Francisco edition. Syra's serial ran, all right, blah, 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 cranked up the serial. All right. As you may have guessed, the name of the author of the original serial. All right. First it ran as a weekly column in the Sun. Then, so here it was, put all together in newsprint in the Sun. Then it became a book published by Knopf, of all people. Here it is. People who know anything about publishing would doubt that it was published by Knopf, but it was. And then it became a movie, terrible movie by Paramount. Yeah. So, as you may have guessed, the name of the author of the original serial in San Francisco was Armistead Maupin. Now, a Chronicle columnist whose sister lived in Larkspur and read Syra's Marin version of the serial remembered that it had started in our San Francisco edition, and she prodded the editors at the Chronicle to find the original author. Armistead was found, cranked up his serial, now called Tales of the City, and went on to fame and fortune. He thought about calling it the serial, and we said, our name, copyrighted. So Tales of the City wasn't bad. So in addition to Syra and Armistead, the Sun had a wide open door for interesting thinkers and doers. They ranged from Frank Herbert's Dune, reading on how science fiction is often old news, to current innovators such as Stuart Brand of the Whole Earth Catalog, to my favorite, the off-the-wall contributions such as Chaz Fleischman with his weekly cartoon strip, Dag's Bag. Anybody remember Dag's Bag? Here was Dag's Bag. It was very good. Now, Dag's Bag had his ups and downs. Mainly downs, if you queried the women in the Sun's back shop. On more than one occasion, it's actually one of these various, one of these actual cartoon strips. The ladies in the back shop threatened to walk off the job unless an especially sexist Dag cartoon strip was pulled from the paper before publication. They prevailed. But I've got evidence right here. All right. Dag quit for a month, then was talked into coming back. He was pulled again, and then he quit for good. Many missed him, but he said he was tired of the struggle. Less controversial were our many ventures in addition to publishing a newspaper. For 30 years, we organized and sponsored a running race with a big, it's stuff over here about it. Where is the running race? The Pacific Sun. First it was a marathon, but that was a lot of work. So then we whittled it down to a 10K. So we plunged into wine tasting and restaurant reviews, but instead of relying on expert assessments, we would assemble groups of friends and report on their varied taste and judgments. Our smartest variation was dining out with the kids. We looked for restaurants where some of the menu items met juvenile tastes, the waitstaff was kid-friendly, the supplied crayons were of good quality, and very important, The flooring in the dining area was resilient. Why was that? Because when a kid knocked something off the table, it bounced and did not break. The cereal was a huge attention getter for the Sun, and in a way we had never expected. It led us to do battle with NBC and to win. And here's how it happened. The cereal was not imitated in papers throughout America. And in New York, it came to the attention of people at NBC, including one particular producer. He saw the serial not as a parody, but as a factual report on dissolute doings in Marin County. He was said to have already held dark thoughts about the area's lifestyle after a female friend left him and moved to California. NBC decided that an expose was in order, and they sent this producer and a TV crew to do the job. Cameramen and reporters spent several weeks recording what they encountered or thought they had encountered. To narrate a doomsday report, they sent Edwin Newman, one of their super serious reporters, to San Francisco, not to Marin. They parked him not in Marin, but a suite in the Mark Hopkins in San Francisco. And he was handed a script that made it clear that Marin was nuts. The program, entitled I Want It All Now, pulled out all the stops in its expose of Marin's dangerously hedonistic lifestyle. The problem was that a lot of stuff was just made up, ranging from wrong divorce and suicide statistics to quotes that were selectively edited to made-up number of yacht clubs in foreign cars. But the showstopper was a titillating scene involving a hot tub and peacock feathers that was actually a setup that was created only for the TV team. We claimed foul in a special edition in the Sun, and Barbara Boxer, then a Marin supervisor, prompted a demand for an investigation by the National News Council. That was a group of top-level journalists who back then functioned as a check on journalistic facts. Boy, do we need them now. And the News Council sent to Marin a respected investigator, Ned Schnurman, who spent a week here and after a thorough check reported back to the subsequent News Council that the program was full of serious mistakes. The News Council, at its subsequent meeting to take up the complaint, voted that the program was, quote, journalistically flawed at essential points, and that having a respected newsman such as Newman front the program was a clear mistake. Needless to say, we had a field day with the News Council reported. This is just one of about 5 issues of the paper we devoted to how they set it up and how horrible it was, and the guy who came out to look at the facts, and then finally this very triumphant edition of the paper. So, after this nice success of sticking it to NBC, we created what we hope would be an even bigger success. But we missed the boat. This was our plan to create a new community in Marin named Marin Solar Village. Now, in 1974, the 1,271 acres at Hamilton Air Base was decommissioned as an active military facility, and the land was declared surplus property. Now, the old-timers in Marin thought it would be great to have our own commercial airport there. Lots of Marin residents thought that was a noisy, bad idea. But as the saying goes, you can't beat something with nothing. So what was the alternative to a noisy airport? Enter Sim van der Rijn, retiring in 1978 as state architect. I drove out to his place in Inverness to interview him about his legacy at Sacramento. After a drink or two, or maybe more, Sim had an idea. Why not use the Hamilton land for a new sustainable community, integrating renewable energy technology? I said he should write a major article for the Sun proposing the idea. He did, and the idea took off. The new nonprofit Marin Solar Village Corporation was formed with me as chairman and the SIM as the design director. We enlisted an amazing group of advisors. Here are just 10 of them. Vice Chairman Alf Heller, founder of California Tomorrow. Treasurer Richard Moss, Vice President, Bank of America. State Senator Peter Baer. Stuart Brand, editor, Coevolution Quarterly. Phelps Dewey, assistant to the Publisher, San Francisco Chronicle. Elizabeth Gatoff, former United States Treasurer. Byron Lydecker, Chairman, Redwood Bank. Michael Murphy, founder of Esalen, and Roger Kent, former Democratic State Chairman and leader of the legendary Kent family. So, Sim recruited a design team that produced an amazingly detailed plan, and we traveled to Washington and got support. But we had to gain local support, and we were up against the old guard that had dug in its plan for a commercial airport. Marin Solar Village versus an airport was bitterly fought in 3 separate county-wide referendums. By close margins, the airport was turned down every time, but so was Solar Village. Here's some of the material that here shows the vote on Measure B, and here's a diagram of the thing, and inside is all the diagrams of the great things that were going to happen. Here is even fancier thing. Here's the a ballot for Kay Copeland. All right. And here's all this, again, all this very handsome material about Marin Solar Village. And here was even a bumper sticker, if you wanted one. And these are classic. Don't steal my bumper sticker. And here again is her ballot, Kay Copeland. Okay. So was Solar Village, close but didn't win it. Still, there was hope. The Jimmy Carter White House had blessed the idea. The Department of Energy had funded several elaborate plans. Senator Alan Cranston was on board. Governor Jerry Brown was a supporter. And his technology chief, Bill Press, another Inverness resident, and a neighbor of Sim's, was a huge backer. A majority of the Marin Board of Supervisors was with us. A major developer had been lined up. What was the problem? It was the fact that Hamilton was and is within the city limits of Novato. So the Novato City Council needed to bless the idea. There was a climatic meeting at the Marin Civic Center, a combined meeting of the Marin Board of Supervisors and the Novato City Council. Solar Village had to be endorsed by a majority of the 5 members of each group. At the joint meeting, the supervisors backed Solar Village. But a third Novato council member that we needed to make a Novato majority was not there. There had been a conflict that had prompted her absence. There was a thought that she had chickened out. Sadly, Solar Village was dead. Now, these days, in the old Fairfield is a development of homes and offices. It's not bad, but not exceptional. There's a chance for it to be exceptional as Marin Solar Village. About the same time the sun was being, Solar Village was being put to sleep, the sun woke up to a big change in the way it was distributed. As with many publications of the area, you paid for it. In our case, $15 a year for a mail subscription. Then suddenly it was free. What had happened? Well, it was a product of our first national convention of alternative news weeklies in Seattle in 1978. I chatted with Bob Roth, the publisher of the hugely successful Chicago Reader, and asked him how much he charged for his paper. Nothing, he said, it's free. Bob explained what publishers should have known by then. Paid circulation doesn't even break even. That's so because the cost of delivery and also replacing lost subscribers, which is called the churn, happens because up to a third of your paid subscribers can lose interest and move away each year. The cost to replace them is usually much more than what is collected from subscriptions or news racks. A publication that makes money on advertising, and most do, wants to be seen by, anybody seen the Costco magazine? Whoa, talk about ads. Costco's not paying for those ads. On its way to offer the publication free, or one way to offer the publication free, it's free, presto. Every one of the 35 papers at the Seattle convention, the Sun included, went from being paid to free, if they hadn't done so already. The Sun circulation jumped from about 12,000 to 35,000, and ad sales climbed nicely. Incidentally, I was elected president of this new National Association of Alternative News Weeklies. I was seen, there's a New Yorker story about it, and I was seen as a peaceful moderate in the middle of a bunch of highly contentious publishers. There was one in San Francisco named Bruce Brugman, and he and I, all that. The rest of the editors decided, he's better than Bruce. So I was the peaceful moderate. Now, in 1982, my wife, Kay, joined Barbara Boxer's San Rafael office and was there until 1984, when I implored her to help keep the Sun afloat. That she did to spectacular effect. She became, during her 16 years at the Sun, accounts manager, production manager, classified advertising manager, circulation manager, display advertising manager, and associate publisher. The Sun, Pacific Sun, would not have survived without her. In 2000, she did what she'd wanted to do all along. She got a master's degree in counseling psychology at the California Institute for Integral Studies and became a licensed therapist. She'd been doing therapy unlicensed at the Sun for quite a while. Oh, yes. And in addition to those jobs at the paper, she also managed 2 teenagers we had from a previous marriage and 2 youngsters born in 1978-81. Kay Copeland did it all. I would not be standing here without the benefit of her great good nature and astonishing skills. Yes, thank you, Miss. Yeah. Which something else here. Oh, the 80s also several other memorable events. I wrote a profile of Tom Hayden for the Sun, and traveled with him down to Cupertino to hang out at Apple with Steve Jobs. Now, Tom liked the profile, and he invited Kay, me, and our son Chris, age 3, to hang out with him, his wife Jane Fonda, and their son Troy at their ranch above Santa Barbara. What I remember, high point in my life, what I remember best was that Kay, Chris, and I slept in a spare bedroom. And one morning, there was a knock on the door. Jane Fonda said she was cooking eggs for breakfast and asked how we would like ours done. And I said scrambled. And in 1984, the Sun picked up 4 awards from the California News Publishers Association. First place for general excellence among all the weeklies in the state, first place for writing, first place for local advertising, second place for in-depth reporting. Now, in 1987, Jim McClatchy sold to ARC, his highly regarded weekly paper in Tiburon, for, Marilyn Kessler and Barbara Ganas, who for years had swapped the editorship every 4 months, now each owned a third of the ARC, and I owned the other third, along with the production of the ARC shifting to the Sun's composing room in Mill Valley, and printing was now handled by Marin Sun Printing plant that I owned, that Kay and I owned in San Rafael. There's a person here who worked with a plan. Mary Hickey, where's Mary Hickey? There she is. All right. Thank you, Mary. Now, the focus of the Sun was Marin County with one odd exception. A wealthy supporter of the Sandinistas paid for me and 9 others to travel to Nicaragua in hopes we would influence our local perception of the Sandinistas' struggle with the Contras that were backed by the CIA and Ronald Reagan. Our influence was dubious, but we did note that nice-looking Sandinista women in downtown Managua were much more likely to be carrying AK-47s than handbags. Here is one. There are a couple of them, actually. The first big event in the 90s threatened to wipe out the Pacific Sun. In the mail, one day, I received an official letter from the Internal Revenue Service saying the Sun owed thousands of dollars in back employee withholding taxes. Unless we paid up quickly, they would shut us down. So a nice woman we had hired to process our payroll had stolen us blind. We owed years' worth of money she had withheld from employee paychecks and diverted to her own failed scheme to build a computerized payroll program. One might ask, as we did, for God's sakes, why had the IRS been so slow to catch her? This went on for years. Because she had once worked for the IRS and knew of a hole in the system. If you process employee paperwork but hold onto the money, they will catch you. But if you don't even process the paperwork, they won't know what's happening for years. Then they will, with a vengeance. We asked Barbara Boxer, then a senator, if she could help us. She said no. A senator could be helpful with lots of things in the federal government, but the IRS is untouchable. However, Hal Silent, our wonderful lawyer, talked the IRS into letting us pay on the installment plan. The Sun survived. Actually, it was a little better than that. The cheating bookkeeper went to prison and somehow connected with a nice gentleman who owned property in the Sierra. When she was paroled, he sold the property, gave us the money to offset our losses, and married the woman who had cheated us. Oh, isn't that a nice story? Yeah. I will wind up the Pacific Sun part of this talk by finally lifting the curtain on something I bet some of you wondered when I would ever get around to. It was and is the Pacific Sun personals. The little ads in the classified section that romantically connected hundreds of Marin folks, some for marriages that have lasted to this day, and also made the Pacific Sun a ton of money in the process. Classified ads first appeared in printed newspapers in 1763. In the 1800s, they appeared on the first page of American newspapers as tiny little notices. Then they came to the Pacific Sun as Super Sun want ads priced at $1 each shortly after I bought the paper, 1966. In the late 70s, each issue would have 20 to 30 of them. The subjects were innocuous, an appeal to find fellow victims of an unscrupulous tow truck operator, or an offer to help write term papers. But as the 80s unfolded, the number of ads began to grow and the main subject changed. Now there were scores of ads such as these, quote, "I'm looking for a special man who has a spacious home to share with a young woman roommate," end quote. And another one, "Tall, handsome, well-built male, recently separated, would like to meet a foxy lady, 25 to 45, quite a spread, who enjoys swinging good times in some of the better places in San Francisco. Plus, instead of just a dribble, the personals were now half a page of a 5-page classified section. We charge for them just as we charge for an ad to sell your car. Then came the personals revolution. A Boston alternative weekly, The Phoenix, joined forces with a software firm to create telephone personals. A print ad still ran in the paper, but now it was free. Revenue was generated when respondents dialed a special phone line, punched a code number attached to the ad that attracted them, and chatted with the person who had placed the ad with the code number. The call the caller made was billed at $1.99 a minute to their credit card, with most of that going to the newspaper that had run the service. Now, the Sun jumped at the chance, as did most of the nation's alternative weeklies and quite a few dailies. The ads rolled in, and so did the money. By 1995 each week, the Sun carried 11 pages of personal ads in tiny type that far outpaced the other 6 pages of general classifieds. And in case you're curious, of the 11 pages of personals, 5.5 were men seeking women, 4 were women seeking men, and 1.5 were other. Helping propel this system were personals parties, an idea dreamed up by the Alternative Weekly in San Diego. About once a month, singles, both real singles and people pretending to be, gathered at a nice local restaurant or bar to check out the action. The host venue usually provided snacks, while the party growers paid for drinks. The admission fee was a written personals ad. Some of you may remember, one popular Marin location was Margaritaville in Sausalito, once known as Zach's, famous for turtle races, and today named Salito's Crab House. The ads required for admission to the party were published in the paper, which prompted phone calls that could stretch on for quite a while at $1.99 a minute. However, paid personals were doomed. In 1995, in San Francisco, a computer programmer at Charles Schwab named Craig Newmark created free internet want ads as a way for his friends to meet. He had no idea. It was pals that meet you at the bar. All right. Free want ads expanded exponentially as Craigslist, and essentially they wiped out paid classified advertising in newspapers throughout the world. All due to Craig Newmark wanting his pals to find a place to meet up at a bar. All right. Also, printed ads for romantic connections gave way to internet versions such as Match.com that were paid but could offer photos. In 2003, the Sun's personal count of ads had plunged from 11 pages to 3, and by 2007, less than half a page. All that money down the drain. But it was great while it lasted. The other day, Kay ran into a new friend at a party who asked about Kay's job history. Kay said she and her husband had owned the Pacific Sun. "Oh my God," said the new friend. "That's where my husband and I met." Then a week later, we ran into still another woman who said she and her husband had met through Pacific Sun personals. So they were not a failure. All right. And so ends the Pacific Sun part of my story. And in 2004, just as Kay and I said farewell to 38 wonderful, productive, adventurous years at our newspaper, the Mill Valley Chamber of Commerce honored the Pacific Sun as the business of the year. It's a nice way to go out. In 2004, Kay and I decided to sell the Sun because all of our 6 children were out of school and working. I'd turned 70 and was somebody in line with our approach to take over. That somebody was Bill Johnson, a good friend and leader of the Palo Alto Weekly, plus other weeklies on the peninsula. He was prospering with ads from real estate firms, Why couldn't he do that in Marin, where real estate was the main industry? So we sold to Bill. And as the new editor, he brought in Sam Chapman, Barbara Boxer's former chief of staff in D.C. and a former newspaper editor in Sonoma. The plan worked for a while, and then it didn't. Bill sold the paper to a member of his shareholder group who wanted his own newspaper. The new person wasn't good at it, and he sold the Sun to the San Jose owner of a paper called The Bohemian, a weekly in Sonoma. Now, up in Healdsburg, there is published an emaciated edition of the flourishing old Pacific Sun with nearly no Marin content and most of the ads for Sonoma County businesses. After selling the Sun, I looked around for something to do. First, Barbara Boxer and I aimed to write a book on how she, a liberal Bay Area woman with not a lot of Southern California contacts, kept winning statewide elections. Our plan died when Barbara said at lunch one day that we should each have final approval on the book. Now, that's how politicians do it, but that's not how it's done in journalism. So we had finished our glass of wine and went away. In case you wonder, why did Barbara keep winning? After losing to Pete Aragone from Marin supervisor in 1972, she never lost another election. There were two big reasons for her winning streak. One, she came across to the voters as absolutely genuine, which she is. And also, her campaigns hammered on one big theme: family, family, family. No other issues. Well, there were other issues, but not as much attention. With that book, with Barbara not happening, I aimed to write a book about altruism. That's why some people do things that seem to be against their own best interests or even their own survival, such as the Dutch civilians in World War II who saved Jews they didn't know from the Gestapo at great risk to themselves. Kay suggested I find a control group, people who unaccountably do bad things, such as those up the highway at San Quentin. I talked the warden of San Quentin, nice guy named Bob Ayers, in letting me go into the prison, tape record stories from a dozen guys, including some convicted of murder. After talking to about 10 men, I realized that the reason for the antisocial behavior, it didn't take a book to tell that story. A couple of paragraphs would do the job, because almost without exception, the men I talked with had been the product of terrible childhoods. Meanwhile, my life changed again. Bob Ayers, the San Quentin warden, wanted to restart the prison newspaper, the San Quentin News, that had been shut down for years and years. Knowing nothing how to start or run a newspaper, the warden needed help from people who did know. So in 2008, I joined his team of two. It included John Egan, a retired AP reporter and editor, and Joan Liziter, a retired IJ reporter. Since I was the only one of the three who had actually been a publisher and who had also owned a printing plant, I became the de facto publisher of the San Quentin News. Then the only prison-directed newspaper in the U.S. and a keystone of a surging movement, which continues today, to humanize California prisons. Well, one out here in the highway is called a rehabilitation center. You can't call it a prison, not within earsight of the warden. The San Quentin News is a wonderful paper that wins prizes each year, competing against civilian papers in the statewide contest of the California News Publishers Association and elsewhere. One of its main achievements is something called the San Quentin News Forum, and it happened this way. One day in 2012, our daughter Marissa, who was then assistant district attorney in San Francisco, asked me, "Why do you spend so much time in San Quentin?" I said she should come have a look. She did, and at the weekly newspaper staff meeting, she was astonished by the skills and insight of the men. She said to me, I have to show this to the boss. So next time, in came District Attorney George Gascon to become what became the San Quentin News Forum. Is a gathering of about 25 inmates who in the California prison system are now called residents, along with 25 outsiders in the prison system, prosecutors, police, defense attorneys, judges, teachers, politicians. They break into groups of 8 or so and talk frankly about their lives. What got them to where they are now? What they've learned as a result. And this is cops talking to the residents. What they've learned as a result. What plans they have for the future. They find more in common than you might think. One event even included 40 district attorneys from throughout the United States, Chicago, Baltimore, New York, attended a convention in San Francisco. They too were astonished by the common ground between the men in San Quentin and the free people in the criminal justice system. The San Quentin News Forums continue, all organized by a prison newspaper. I think there's an event that's going to happen a week from today. Yeah, not next one. So here's a newspaper that I'll leave up here to look at, and it's got a picture, front page. Convicts in San Francisco cop, San Quentin News hosts Forum for Public Safety, and that picture in the paper, which I'm proud of, is David Lazar, who will be here next week, Assistant Chief, a resident, Tony Chapin, another Assistant Chief, our daughter Marissa, another resident, and me, and still another resident. But you think, well, what in the hell do they talk about? A lot of stuff, and it's pretty magical. Participate. So thanks for listening. There's time. I'd be happy to answer questions. And you're welcome to, I was about to say paw through. I don't mean really want you to paw through, but look through the papers that I've left up here, including the one where Adlai Stevenson is going to be our president, hopefully.
So run it, I think, right?
All right.
Thank you. Fantastic.
You're welcome.
I'm just thrilled. It's not often you have a 91-year-old up here saying the word super cool. So I love that, and I still have my peacock feather. Would you remind everyone where it was located in Mill Valley?
Which what?
The Pacific Sun when you're
Yeah, across the street from City Hall.
Right there, right at level.
We own that building, which goes down this brick walkway into where the Pacific Sun was, and attached to it are 3 commercial shops on Lytton Square. The Shop, Isa, and Wink. Yeah. So that's keeping us afloat.
That's great. You know what? We've just running out of time, so I'm going to suggest this. If you want to come up and see some of the papers, continue the conversation here, please do that. The rest of us, we'll start putting the chairs away, and then everyone will be out of the library by 8 o'clock and happy about everything. So that's what we've got to do now. Thanks so much for being here. We really appreciate it.